The state of California recently passed the toughest energy legislation in the country. It's a law to reduce emissions and promote alternative energy. 3 Tuesdays from now, on Election Day, California voters will get to decide whether or not to scrap that law, to essentially get rid of it. At the California Secretary of State's website, you will find that 91% of the money that's been raised to kill the state's energy law comes from oil companies, many of which are out-of-state oil companies. In other words, people who make a lot of money when their emissions are not restricted are funding the effort to kill California's law to restrict their emissions and also to come up with alternative energy that competes with them. What's remarkable, what's worth preserving in amber, what's worth imprinting on as a democratic norm about this, is that figuring out who's paying to kill California's new energy law is a doable thing. Proposition 23 to kill that energy law may indeed pass. Those in favor of killing that law have dumped a ton of money into this effort. But Californians can at least know that it's essentially all out-of-state oil companies who are trying to kill California's law. Those oil companies can try to make themselves look like just a California housewife when they are running their TV ads, but in the end, they do have to disclose their donations. When you as a viewer see a Yes on Prop 23 ad, you can go online and find out that Yes on Prop 23 is not actually this nice, personable California housewife. It's Valero Energy and Occidental Petroleum and Marathon Energy and Frontier Oil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's oil companies. But at least you get to know that. It is a knowable thing. And that, this year, counts as a good news story about the small d democratic nature of America's democracy. Because at least in California, politicians from Arnold Schwarzenegger to Gavin Newsom and everybody in between, people who want to protect California's environmental laws, they are at least able to say, we're protecting California's environmental laws from an effort that is 91% funded by mostly out-of-state oil companies who are trying to gut our state's efforts to protect our own environment. At least they can say that. At least they can make that argument. At least voters can know who is on each team. That is the exception and not the rule this year.
I challenge Paul Rove to tell me that this money isn't coming from billionaires and millionaires, insurance companies, oil companies, major executives who have about as much in common and concern of the people in Northeast Pennsylvania as I don't know what does.
Vice President Joe Biden talking there about a conservative group called American Crossroads, headed by Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie, two of the men who were running the Republican Party under George W. Bush and who apparently now still are, regardless of whose name is on the door at the RNC. American Crossroads originally set a fundraising goal of $52 million for this election cycle. They have reportedly already passed that goal. They're now on track to raise and spend $70 million on anti-Democrat campaign ads. Some of what they raise requires no disclosure whatsoever. What has been disclosed, however, is hilarious. As of the last period for which we have disclosure reports, in the part of their funds that they disclose, more than 90% of their money came from 3 people. 3, count them, 3 individual billionaires. The New York Times reporting today that last week, Mr. Rove and Mr. Gillespie, quote, received a check for several $1 million from a single donor, whom they declined to identify. Naturally. Nor are they required to identify this person. This anonymous funding thing is the same charge that the Obama administration is levying right now against the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce not only does not disclose their donors, but they are known to receive foreign money. And so far, the only assurance they've offered that their foreign money doesn't end up paying for the ads they're running is just their assertion that it doesn't. Trust us. We say that's not happening. Trust us. Or don't. Last night, Vice President Joe Biden made clear that he's on the or don't side. He said, quote, I challenge the Chamber of Commerce to tell us how much of the money they're investing is from foreign sources. Responding to that challenge, the Chamber answered, saying, quote, 0, as in not a single cent. Trust us. That got a double-barreled response from the White House. First from Vice President Biden, who shot back, I'm not taking their word for it. Show me. And then from White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs.
If there are organizations raising tens of millions of dollars who won't tell us who their donors are, my guess is they're not telling us for a reason, because they have something to hide.
The end result of this sustained White House campaign against the Chamber of Commerce, against this anonymous funding stuff, came in a letter from the chamber obtained by the New York Times today. Quote, "The chamber will not be silenced. In fact, for the next 3 weeks leading up to Election Day, you will see us ramp up our efforts. We say we're not using foreign money to influence the elections, and if you keep saying we are, in other words, we'll influence the elections even more with money from who knows where. Tremble before us, American dogs." No word on whether the new round of ads from the Chamber of Commerce will be in Mandarin. This is one of those moments where you can watch the Beltway Common Wisdom calcify before your very eyes. As the president makes an issue out of this, as the vice president makes an issue out of this, as the White House spokesman makes an issue out of this, as the Democratic Party runs ads making an issue of this, as, in my case, random senior citizens in Delaware raise this issue with me when I'm at a campaign event that doesn't address this issue at all, as Democrats really start to make an issue out of this, about this thing that is new in American elections. You can see the Beltway Common Wisdom about it forming. You can see it right now, today. You can see this common wisdom forming that actually this really isn't an issue that Democrats should be talking about. This isn't something that voters care about. This isn't a good thing for Democrats to talk about in this election. Keep hearing that today from Beltway pundits. And, you know, sometimes when people are giving that advice, it's not because they think the punch being thrown against them won't hurt them. It's because they just want to stop being punched. Last night in Wisconsin, in a very hard-fought Senate race, Democratic Senator Russ Feingold ignored this rapidly calcifying, stupid, disarm the Democrats' common wisdom and went ahead and hit his Republican opponent, Ron Johnson, on this issue over and over again. Ron Johnson initially defended what he called the free speech rights of these anonymous donors running ads in support of him, before he finally was forced to admit that, yeah, maybe people voting in Wisconsin this year have a right to know who's trying to lacquer the election there with their money.
You say you don't want them? Will you call on them to stop?
I have no control over that.
Will you ask them to stop?
That's part of the problem. You have no control over that process.
Will you ask them to stop?
That's their right to free speech. You want to be able to select who can have free speech and who doesn't want to have free speech.
I want everybody to have free speech, but I want them to be able to, as you just said, they ought to disclose. You haven't even called on these people to disclose. You just said you're for disclosure. You won't even call on them to disclose.
I'd be happy to have them disclose.
Well, then why don't you ask them to do it?
Disclose.
Okay.
I want disclosure.
Good. Let's see.
But don't forget, word on the street in Washington, Democrats don't bother with this issue. Nothing to see here. People don't care. Never mind those cheering people in the audience, happy about the Republican caving on this issue and having no way to defend his earlier position. Pay no attention. Joining us now is Democratic pollster Celinda Lake. Ms. Lake, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Nice to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as a Democratic pollster, do you think that, contrary to rapidly calcifying Beltway wisdom, this is a good issue for Democrats on the campaign trail?
I think it's a terrific issue for candidates on the campaign trail, and it just shows how wrong Beltway wisdom is. This is an issue that is a good October surprise for the Democrats and the progressives. It's a way of really raising a fundamental question about whose side you're on. It ties into an economic narrative that we've had a hard time getting off the ground. In the 22 congressional districts where the chamber is running its ads with foreign money, 184,000 jobs have been outsourced to many of these very same foreign corporations. These people aren't putting up their money for nothing. What are they buying? And this isn't free speech, it's bought speech, and the public has a right to know who's trying to buy their candidates.
Now, you raised the important issue of outsourcing, connecting this not just to the idea that there may be foreign influences, foreign sources trying to influence American elections, but that they may be self-interested foreign sources that want to influence the elections because they want more outsourcing of American jobs and they want to support candidates who will do that. That's an important next piece of this in terms of the messaging. Are you hearing that from Democrats?
I think you will hear it from Democrats, and you'll hear it in terms of questions being raised about trade policies. I mean, you don't get something for nothing. When people put up campaign contributions, they want something in return. When foreign corporations are trying to influence American elections, you can bet they want something in return. This should be illegal. It should be disclosed, and it should be illegal. And this is a great issue for Democrats to end this election because it talks about whose side you're on. It gives an economic message, and it's something that ordinary people can understand. It cuts through all this back and forth stuff and says, you know, just as Feingold was saying clearly, get them to disclose, tell them to stop. This isn't free speech. It's bot speech.
Is there a difference in the types of districts, the types of states that this would work and this would not work? Is this something that will resonate more in more liberal districts or more conservative districts?
Actually, what it's going to resonate more in is more blue-collar districts in the Midwest. Some of the districts, frankly, that the Democrats are having the hardest time with. This is a great issue to unite blue-collar voters of all kinds, Democratic-leaning union workers and Tea Party people, all of them against foreign corporate influence. All of them say that our economic system is being undermined by these policies, and these corporations are trying to pay for a Congress that will keep these policies going.
Let me just ask you one process question here, and that is, all of the polling data that I have seen, all of the descriptions that I've seen, even of focus group data on what messages most resonate with the electorate for this election, is in line with what you're saying, is essentially saying that this is a good issue for Democrats. And yet, the reason that I'm sort of wailing against raging against the Beltway common wisdom here is that it really is calcifying common wisdom in Washington right now that Democrats shouldn't do this, that they shouldn't talk about this, that it doesn't resonate. As far as I can tell, that's totally contradicted by the data. So does that mean that the sort of punditocracy just wants Democrats to not talk about this because it makes them uncomfortable? Or why is that the default position?
Well, I think, there's all kinds of insanity in Washington, and this is just yet another example. And some of this is Republicans, of course, who don't want it talked about. I mean, when Karl Rove says don't talk about it, we ought to double up the volume. If Rachel Maddow said don't talk about it, that would be something entirely different. But the other thing I think is that people do not in this town understand what the economy is like out there. People are out of touch with what the economy is like and how people are feeling and how Americans want to stand up for America again. And this is a very strong issue in Main Street, in Middle America. And I think you're going to see a lot of Democratic candidates who say, common sense, I don't need polling on this. Common sense tells me this is a good issue.
Democratic pollster Celinda Lake, it's nice to have you on the show. Thanks very much for your time.
Nice to be here.